Closed on Sunday. Chick-fil-A does it. In parts of the United States, there are still whole towns where stores close on Sunday. It's a day of rest, a Sabbath, isn't it? Or is it? I mean, this is actually a question I get a lot. Almost every week, I'll get an email or see a comment on one of my videos where somebody's asking, what day is the Sabbath really? I mean, Jesus practiced the Sabbath on Saturday, but why do Christians worship on Sunday? Are we celebrating Sabbath on the wrong day? Should we be going to church on Saturdays? Or does it even matter anymore? Well, today I'm going to answer those questions and help you to see not only maybe what we should be doing, but how we got there. And let's start with that first part. Now, one thing we know is that Jesus practiced Sabbath on Saturday. We know this for sure. Sabbath was a roughly 24-hour period of rest between sundown Friday and sundown Saturday. There was a meal, there was worship, and there was a lot of rest. Not only were there activities prohibited by Scripture, but Pharisees required what were called the 39 melachot, which were 39 categories of activities that were prohibited on Shabbat, which is the Hebrew word for Sabbath. And part of those 39 melachot were that you couldn't cook, you couldn't clean, you couldn't walk very far, you couldn't run your business, you weren't even allowed to heal people on Shabbat. Shabbat was a day of rest. And here's the interesting thing. This didn't change after Jesus was gone. Early Christians still practiced Shabbat on Saturday. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? Like even the ones outside of the Holy Land? Yep. And check this out. We can see in the book of Acts that it was still Paul's custom to celebrate Shabbat every week. It says, as was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures. Hundreds of years later, even after the temple's gone, we still find evidence of many Christians observing the Sabbath on Saturday. In short, nothing about the Sabbath really changes for centuries after the resurrection. What changes is Sunday. Within just a few years after Jesus' death and resurrection, we can see that Sunday becomes a day of worship and fellowship for early Christians. In the book of Acts, it says that on the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. So already we're seeing a church supper, an evening service, and a preacher who talks too long and puts people to sleep. And if you ever thought your pastor preached long sermons, you should definitely check out what happens to the dude sitting in the window while Paul's preaching. But just like how they continued to observe Sabbath on Saturdays, we can see that early Christians began these practices on Sunday too. And they would continue these practices for centuries, which leads to a really important question. Why? Why are they doing these things on Sunday? Why do they have this separate day of worship and fellowship? And there are actually several really important reasons for this. First, as soon as Christianity begins to spread beyond Jerusalem and the surrounding regions, it becomes less and less Jewish. And what I mean by that is that Christianity spreads and it begins to reach more and more Gentiles, non-Jewish people. And Gentiles have an entirely different culture than Jewish people. For one thing, Gentiles did not necessarily have the same 7-day week that Jewish people did. Now, living in the 21st century where we have normative standards of time across the world, it's easy to assume that the world has always functioned by a 7-day week. I mean, it's in the book of Genesis, isn't it? But the truth is, at the time of Jesus, most of the world had never read the book of Genesis, and they based their lives around very different calendars. The Chinese and the Egyptians had a 10-day week. Aztecs had a 13-day week. Ancient Romans had an 8-day week. It actually wasn't even until the time of Augustus, who was the emperor when Jesus was born, that the 7-day week was truly incorporated into the culture of the Roman Empire. But even then, many people still used the 8-day week. In fact, the 8-day week wouldn't be truly abandoned for another 300 years. And here's why this matters. Because it shows us that the Jewish calendar and culture functioned very differently than the rest of the world into which the gospel was spreading. which leads to the second reason that Sunday worship arose in addition to Saturday Shabbat. Most people couldn't observe a Sabbath. While the Jewish culture had been built around this idea of Sabbath, most people couldn't take an entire day away from work. Their boss wouldn't allow them. Their lives just weren't set up to function that way. The idea of a 24-hour period of no work seemed impossible. So instead of an evening meal on Friday followed by 24 hours of rest, Christians would gather on Sunday morning, the same day of the week upon which Jesus rose from the dead. And they would spend time together eating food and worshiping God. Some Christians would still observe Sabbath on Saturdays, but everyone would come together on Sunday. And when we look at the writings of early Christians, we can see that this Sunday gathering is never actually referred to as the Sabbath. Sunday is always referred to as the Lord's Day. It's something very different. So then the question is, well, then when did things change? What happened to make people think of Sunday as a Sabbath instead of Saturday? Well, believe it or not, the idea of Sabbath on Sunday is actually a relatively new idea, but its beginnings trace back almost 1,300 years. You see, in the early 4th century, something happened that changed the world forever. Through the Edict of Milan, the Roman Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity throughout the empire. All of a sudden, Christianity went from being a persecuted faith to the favored religion of the emperor. And less than 10 years after the Edict of Milan, Constantine instituted another law that ultimately led to the confusion over Sabbath that we're discussing today. In 321 AD, Constantine issued an edict that said, "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and the people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits." In other words, Sunday would become a day of rest. This changed everything for Christians. Now they had a day when they could truly rest, a day when they could worship without any other obligations. Now Christians could build their entire faith around Sunday. That said, though, there are a few things that I want to point out, because these are the things that, when we overlook them, have led to this confusion about the Sabbath. First, Constantine never actually uses the word Sabbath. Sunday is a day of rest, but it's never directly connected to Shabbat by Constantine. We might think it's safe to assume that he's doing this. I mean, it sure seems that way. But there's no real evidence suggesting that this was actually his reason. Second, there's no mention of worship in the edict. It worked out for Christians that they could more conveniently gather for worship, but Constantine never includes this as a reason or requirement in his edict. Again, it seems easy to make this leap. I mean, why else would he make this a law? But there's no proof. It's all circumstantial. It's all conjecture in hindsight. We're looking at this situation through the lens of how the world looks today, how we know things turn out, what feels normal for us, not through the eyes and the actions of those living 1,300 years ago. And one thing that helps us to keep that in mind is this third important thing for us to notice about this edict, which is that it really doesn't look like Shabbat. I mean, yes, this is a day of rest, but it's not Shabbat. I mean, for one, certain people are still allowed to work on Sundays. Farmers have the freedom to work their land if they need to. And for those who aren't farming, yes, businesses are closed, but that's about as specific as it gets. Nothing says that you can't cook or walk certain distances. He never says that people can't chop wood or write their names or knit a doily. If you're a part of the Jewish community, if you've grown up observing Shabbat, this is not Shabbat. This is just a day to rest after Shabbat. Constantine isn't making Sunday the Sabbath. In fact, many people continued to observe the Saturday Sabbath even after this edict. Constantine isn't changing that. However, his actions have consequences. And whether he intended it or not, this edict will totally change Christianity and the way that people see Sunday. By the time the Middle Ages roll around, Christianity is a very different faith than it was at the time of Constantine. Most of the world is Christian. Christianity is built into the fabric of society. The church wields incredible power in people's lives. And things that once began as exercises of faith begin to become church law and dogma. And this is what happens to the Sabbath. By the 11th century, there isn't just a decree that people should rest on Sunday. There are laws to enforce it. There begin to be more and more strict rules around what is allowed on Sunday. And over time, many of these laws begin to look surprisingly like the Sabbath laws at the time of Jesus. With these laws in place, it doesn't take long before the idea of Sunday as Sabbath becomes official. In fact, in the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas declares that the church has the ability to reinterpret the Sabbath and to actually change it to Sunday if it wants to. And by the time of the Reformation, Sunday is so widely accepted as the Sabbath that we see the two words used interchangeably in Christian writings. So as you can see, it's been quite a journey that has brought us to where we are today. This idea of Sunday Sabbath is really a rather new idea, which leads us back to one of those questions that we started with. What does this mean for Christians? And based on what we've learned, I actually think that there are three really important things for Christians to consider when trying to answer that question. First, Sabbath and Sunday were separate. If you've watched many of my videos, you know that what I really like to do is look back on what the earliest Christians did. How did Jesus, his disciples, and those earliest followers practice their faith? I mean, I don't think that means that we should ignore all of the Christian tradition that comes after that, not even close. But those earliest Christians give us a very unique and powerful perspective on how to exercise our faith. And what we see in those earliest followers is that they practiced both Sabbath on Saturday and worship and fellowship on Sunday. Sunday did not replace Saturday. It didn't replace the Sabbath. However, it did reflect a new view of Sabbath, which actually leads us to our second thing to consider, which is that Sabbath wasn't required. One of the constant challenges that we see in the early church is the incorporation of Gentiles into what at that time was a strictly Jewish faith. Do Gentiles need to get circumcised? Do they need to obey all of the law? Early Christians constantly wrestled with these questions. And what we see is that in most cases, the answer was sometimes. Right? Paul speaks harshly about the Judaizers, those early Christians who demanded that people become fully Jewish in every respect. And then at the same time, Paul has Timothy circumcised. I mean, we see that his response and those of most early Christians were very contextual. They did what they needed to do in order to reach new people with the gospel. And while Jesus did not come to abolish the law, they did not believe that people should be prisoners to the law. And this included Shabbat. That said, one thing that is abundantly clear as we go throughout the centuries is this third thing, which is that rest is an essential value of the Christian community. Christians who observe Sabbath before Constantine are taking time to rest. Constantine requires a day of rest that becomes part of the Christian culture. And this emphasis on rest never goes away. The day of rest may shift to a new day, but the value is still there. The importance of rest is just as central to our faith now as it was at the time of Jesus. It looks different, but it's there. And that makes sense because it's important for us to remember that Sabbath isn't just a proper noun, it's also a general noun. The word Shabbat isn't just the name of a day, it literally means to cease or to rest. God wants us to rest. Whether it's on Sunday or Saturday, or perhaps you're somebody whose only day off is Friday or Tuesday. Rest is an important part of our faith. And so what do you think? Has any of this changed the way that you feel about Sabbath? Has it made you want to observe a true Saturday Sabbath in addition to Sunday worship? Has it made you feel free to celebrate Sabbath on a different day and in different ways than you did before? Or are you just waking up now and you're wondering how in the world you ended up watching this YouTube video? Well, whatever the case, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments section below. And while you're down there, why don't you leave me some ideas of other questions that you've been wondering, tough questions that we can wrestle through together. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch these videos and for the support that you've given us in growing this channel and reaching even more people. Speaking of which, please take a moment to go down below and click that thumbs up to say that you like the video. And then while you're down there, why don't you click that subscribe button and the bell next to it? It's these things that tell YouTube that these videos and this channel matter, and that causes them to promote and spread these videos to even more people who have never seen them before. And so thank you for taking the time to do those things. Just a few seconds can make a huge difference. Again, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great week, and God bless.